Behind every technology is a team of real, subjective, and flawed human beings that influence the ultimate direction that the technology or product takes us. Understanding the team behind the tools we use helps us make better decisions about how we use those tools in our lives. So, from the leadership drama at OpenAI to the makeup of digital and physical product design teams, we're talking about people and the process of innovation today. My guest this week is Michele Heyward. Michele is a civil engineer turned founder of Posi+iveHire, where she helps employers create cultures to recruit and retain Black, Latinx, and Native women engineers, scientists, data, and technical professionals. The last time I checked, I think women of color made up like 2% of professional engineers, which is way too low. So I cannot wait for this conversation. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. There are many. So whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and you're ready for the robot takeover, cool, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay. I'm a product market fit strategist, innovation consultant, and venture fundraising advisor. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of the people part of design, engineering, and innovation. Michele, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk to you. I always like having other engineers on the show. I think we think differently. And I like to feel special. So it's great when I have other engineers with me. Do you think that stat of 2% of professional engineers are women of color, is that accurate?
Combined for Black, Hispanic, Latina, and Native women, last number it was 3.9%. We're just under 4, and that's combined. So
Okay.
it's 2% to 4%. Like, oh well, that's about twice as much, but it's still really, really low. It's still very low.
It's still really, really, really low. Yeah. I think I saw something like 14% of professional engineers are women, 2% are women of color. You're saying 4%. So the numbers are there, the numbers are low, right? The numbers are around there. Cool. So we'll start with our first segment, Crystal Ball. What does the future hold? This is where I call out interesting predictions for this year, and the experts, my guests, you tell us your hot take. So I'm going to fire some predictions. Michele hasn't heard any of them. So that's kind of the fun in this improv activity. I want you to say, yes, I want that to happen, or no, please, no. Maybe if you know anything about it, you can say, yes, that is happening, but not on this timeline, whatever have you. Okay. So since you're a civil engineer, I thought I'd pull in some predictions made for 2023 that I haven't yet gotten to bring up in the first 40 episodes of Make Sense, just because so much has been on digital. So let us know if you know anything. Okay, indoor farms. So cities are trending towards feeding themselves. So the growth of vertical farms, indoor farms to offer localized solutions to fresh product supply.
I love the idea, but I would say no.
No.
It's going to
Okay. I
it's
think it's really expensive.
And I think it's going to be slow. So if you think about square footage of what people have in cities as far as living space, it's still relatively small. I'm in rural South Carolina. It's small to me and it's small to a lot of people. And so being able to grow
Yeah.
anything outside of spices or basil leaves and stuff like that is going to take up significant square footage, even if it's in one of the planters that has the different levels to it, and you have to be able to
Right.
get direct sunlight, and so is it
Right.
rotating? So yeah, I think it's some things to overcome in trying to do that.
I think when thinking about, bigger farms or like, warehouses with indoor vertical farms, uh, right now I know that the big issue is that our electric grids cannot support the energy needed for really industrial indoor farms. So there's a lot to be figured out. The general direction seems like a good idea, right?
It does. I think it would be good to have localized food. It cuts down on our footprint as far as fuel and travel to get fresh fruits and vegetables specifically, but I think also looking
Mhm.
at it improves access to people within that region because your food prices go down as well. And so I like the
Yeah.
idea. And grid, uh, if you can figure out how to utilize other types of energy that may be more beneficial to that area. I don't know, maybe you do it with fitness. So people are doing spin classes to power up your
I
greenhouses or
love
whatever.
that idea.
Yeah, and then it's a
Let's
benefit to everybody. Like, hey, you get it because you come and work out or you walk on a treadmill. And
yeah.
so figuring out how to tie everyday things together or you get
I
a lot
love
of
that idea, Michelle.
toddlers to run. I forget the founder that has the ball of energy, and she uses it in Africa, and that's what they use to generate energy is a ball that is kicked. And so, how can you utilize like even kids playing to generate energy to really power those things so you aren't necessarily hyper focused on getting power from the grid?
So maybe in the future we can just plug every flywheel and soul cycle and Peloton studio into the grid.
And even your I don't know if you had a banana seat bicycle from the 80s and the 90s or 10 seat. You just figure out a way to harness that energy, bring it back and plug it in if you're riding around the neighborhood. That was the best. So I just figuring out different ways
Awesome.
to create. We're doing the work already. It's just how do we harness that
Yeah.
into electricity?
Awesome. I love that idea. We're gonna have to jam on that on another episode too. Is different and exciting ways to create energy. So the next one, this is another one where I just want to you know bounce off with someone that is a smart science person as well. So I've seen the headlines extracting carbon dioxide from the air. So I've seen some headlines about direct carbon capture installations like in algae farms and being able to do what trees do in eating up CO2, but at scale, because this is the thing that is like really driving climate change. So, capturing, the CO2 and piping it away from the plants and then storing it deep underground. Do you know anything about the progress they've made here? Because I've just heard that they don't know what to do with all of that carbon dioxide once they have captured it.
I'm over here like what are we really doing? We already realized, if you're a Gen Xer, we were the generation like we need to recycle, and it hasn't helped, right? At least in the U.S. I'll just stick to the U.S. And we shouldn't be cutting down trees, and we all went and bought these big houses or whatever. And so I'm sitting here. So now we're saying we want to try to redo what we undid in the last 30 years. And so I'm like, I don't think
Right.
that's really, and now we're like, well, what do we do with the carbon dioxide? That would be why you kind of want to investigate it before you start it. And so what and so it's like what is the byproduct? And just it just goes back to a fossil fuel plant that I did construction on many years ago. And one of the byproducts was gypsum. And you're like, what is that? Sheetrock. You make sheetrock. And so their thing was like, hey, not only can you make money off of this plant, fossil fuel source coal fired power plant because you connect to the grid, one of the byproducts is gypsum and you can sell it because the housing market is booming. That was 2006. We
Yeah.
started construction. Where did the housing market? It tanked. And so
Yeah.
it was a great idea, but you have to think about what does it look like long term. And I think we need to rethink what does that look like at what. And so maybe we do it. We just can't do it at a large scale because we don't have ways to displace the carbon dioxide. Like what
Yeah.
percent? Yeah. And if we find a use for it, what is that use? When it's even when it's in a down market or whatever. And I think it's just more investigation in it.
I see some optimism, and I like that you brought up this. What did you say? It was sheetrock as a byproduct of coal plants. Uh, so, soy lecithin is this byproduct of processing soy for food. And in the early 1900s, they figured out that it was like a coagulant that you could put in chocolate and a lot of other products,
Yep.
which, yeah, might gross you out, but it's just another example of figuring out what to do with a byproduct, putting it to use somewhere else. Um, so yeah, what I know is that we can't plant enough trees to address the surplus of carbon dioxide. It feels like we can, or what I'm hearing is we can collect the carbon dioxide, but we don't know where to put it, which makes it kind of just like recycling and garbage, where we have a lot of it, but we don't know where to put it. Uh,
Yeah.
so we need innovation to step up here, but I'm hoping maybe they didn't figure it out in 2023, but they'll keep figuring it out or pursuing it in 2024. Cool.
Exactly.
All right, I have an easy one for you,
Mhm.
knowing that you work in DEI. So pursuit of non-traditional candidates will expand talent pipelines. So for years, organizations have talked about the strategic value of expanding and diversifying their talent pipelines. So this is saying that in this past year, to fill critical roles, organizations will become more comfortable assessing candidates solely on the skills needed to perform the role rather than just like their credentials.
I like that for several reasons. Not everybody has access to college or wants to go into excessive
Right.
debt for college. So that covers that. Also, when we look at women and Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, they often don't talk about their accomplishments, whether it's certifications, the work they've done on previous projects, or a product. They could be on a manufacturing floor, and being able to have them digitally share just their skill set and their achievements digitally really changes the game, because now we're only focused on skill set. And a resume, even for those of us that are often use a resume or a platform like LinkedIn, we can't capture everything even on a LinkedIn platform, because number one, nobody's going to read it, so they're still doing what keyword search, and that keyword
Mm-hmm.
is usually tied to a skill. And so it just makes more sense that we focus more on skills and skills assessment, skill gaps, upskilling, reskilling, to really better prepare for the future, because we're going to have a labor shortage here in the US as we look at the baby boomers who own most of the wealth
Yeah.
retiring. So that's a huge, I
We
think.
also, I mean, we already have a labor shortage in certain industries, right? Like for
Absolutely.
sure, healthcare, um, and even manufacturing. A lot of blue collar jobs
Exactly.
have plenty of labor shortages. Same with trucking, uh, 18
Yep.
wheelers, and that type of transportation. Uh, my last guest, or one of my more recent guests, will talked about how this whole conversation about AI taking our jobs, like we have to remember, it's really just like white collar service based jobs, because like AI is not taking over, your home plumber, right, or your home electrician anytime soon. So
Exactly. Your
it's
AC
very
repair.
interesting, the conversations in the workforce.
It is AC repair.
How does
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, my dad's an electrician, so if there was an AI, I would have appreciated it a couple of months ago. So, but no, I had to call my 70-plus-year-old dad, like, yeah, I need you because I can't find anybody.
Yeah, it's true. My dad was a civil engineer and land surveyor, so he was also out in the field. And I don't think that what he did with boundary surveys and flood elevation surveys um, it can be enhanced with AI, but it cannot be completed and done at all. So, cool. So let's change to the subject, to the second segment. What do you know? This is where us relatively intelligent, tech and engineering ecosystem insiders discuss some hot mess that's made a national news, and this one is messy. We don't claim to be experts, but we may know a little more than you do. So Friday, November 17th, Sam Altman then CEO of OpenAI, the creators of dall-e and ChatGPT, was fired from his job. Microsoft, who invested 10 billion in the company, didn't know about it. What do you know about it, Michele?
Oh, I you know, looking at ChatGPT and just how far AI has come in the last 10 years, right? We talked about we often everybody would talk about that would talk about AI. We were mostly talking about Watson and what was IBM doing with Watson
Mm-hmm.
and some other players, but that was one of the main ones. And then when ChatGPT dropped a year ago, it was like, oh my God, we can do this with AI. And I'm just a regular person. I'm not a developer. It was really exciting. And so to see within that year OpenAI's name go across the spectrum from K through 12, um, everyday people talking about was really interesting. What has happened with Sam Altman and that board, or the board of OpenAI, or the former board of OpenAI, removing him really draws a question. Is it capitalism at play? And because they were talking about
Mm-hmm.
responsible AI and the impacts or negative impacts it can have on different classes of people, groups of people, what does that look like? And to me, that's probably one of the biggest reasons for this dissension within OpenAI, whether it was Sam's for or pro is around how do they make money, but also the responsible AI. And I don't know who's on which side
Mm-hmm.
because as a good marketer, as a good founder, you're going to be out talking about, yes, I understand the dangers, but you also
Yeah.
understand you're in a whole new market. You're leading the way to a trillion dollar industry. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting
Yeah.
to see the confusion in there because I think it's
The
really
posturing. Yeah.
yes, that's going on. Just not just
So
OpenAI openly showing it.
100%. So this is what I know, and to back up for anyone that wasn't following, and to be honest, I was not following it until Michele said, let's talk about it. And I was like, okay, what's going on? So Friday, November 17th, Sam Altman is told at 12 p.m. by his board. There are 4 people on that board, one of which is his chief scientist, this guy named Ilya, who's a co-founder. He is fired. Over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, they're trying to actually bring him back. Something is happening, right? Next thing we know, on Monday, he's getting hired by Microsoft. Now, Microsoft invested $10 million in OpenAI. The weird thing that I didn't know is that OpenAI is a nonprofit and a for-profit arm, right? So there's a tension between the nonprofit and the for-profit arm. So, Microsoft hires Sam Altman, and now, as of today, which is Wednesday, November 22nd, Sam Altman is back as CEO. And to kind of explain what Michele's talking about with the ethics at play here, is that there were the 4 people on the board, 2 guys, the chief scientist, the former CEO of Quora, and then 2 women, one of which her name is Helen Toner, and she is the one on the board that is responsible or passionate, not responsible, but passionate about ethics in AI and the role of the human experience. She is now no longer with the board. And apparently her and Sam were doing some posturing and gesturing in the weeks up until November 17th. So we don't know exactly what happened, but it is concerning that both women are no longer on the board, including the one that was known for being an AI ethicist.
Yes.
So now we're going to have to see what happens, right? Are we surprised that there are allegations around honesty and transparency?
No, not in the tech startup space, not around AI. When the market is that large, right? When the opportunity, you can see the opportunity is so large. No, I'm not. It's like, oh, but I can leave and I'll never have to work for 5 generations rich, right? Or 50 generations
Yeah.
rich, opposed to a year ago, it's like we think this is going to work, we think people will like it, and being able to prove and get that traction so quickly, it was like, oh, we can exit tomorrow and still be very well off. And where others are saying, hey, we've had issues with the data, how we've collected um, the data being harmful, we need to slow down. And so that
Yep.
to me is like you said, the women being gone earlier than I think they should have been, especially when you say there one was hyper focused around ethics in AI. I think now we need to be scrutinizing OpenAI more as users and as humans as to what's going on and how the
Right.
data will be used or abused.
Yeah, and I think you just alluded to it, but OpenAI is being sued by a buttload of authors for copyright infringement.
Yep,
There's a bunch of other, lawsuits in the entire kind of AI industry around copyright. And the accusations are that ChatGPT, OpenAI, has been training on shadow libraries, data that we just don't know about.
yep,
We don't know where it came from. It could be stolen. It could be very well will be biased, racist, inaccurate. We have no idea. And so it really, again, does not surprise me that probably at the heart of this is you know, nonprofit versus for profit commercialization, issues of honesty and transparency, tension around ethics, and how to really capitalize on this moment.
absolutely. I think it's exciting and scary at the same time. I don't know how else to describe it in that you're watching the birth of something and you're not sure of what that something is. Is it going to be something that is going to nurture the world or something that is absolutely going to terrorize the world? Um, and in that
Right.
aspect, how do you prepare either way? Do you prepare to support what is nurturing, or do you prepare to defend? And we are like, which because we only have limited resources, or do we just stop it altogether? And I would say Microsoft would be like, no, we're not stopping it because we have invested $10 billion in it. So I think it's really going to be up to individuals, whether they're engineers or technical professionals in machine learning, AI, big data, to still pay attention and understand what's out there. And one thing that my friends and I have done consistently with just chat GPT is test it, right? Just ask it questions. As somebody's like, you're trying to break it, it's not necessarily trying to break it as it is to identify where it has biases. And I can tell you it definitely has gender and
Mhm.
racial issues buried into it from the data that it has been collected. And if you don't know what I mean, go and ask it to do these two things. Ask it to write a resume for a man who is a software engineer and give it the same job description as a job description. Use the same job description. Say, now write a resume for a woman who's a software engineer, and you will see the biases between those two prompts of the resume outputs. And so I highly encourage you just do some things, and you'll start to see why the ethics around it is really important to understand and help mitigate sooner than later. Because once it's done, and it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to undo.
Yeah, it's like it's very crazy, but there's to punch what Michelle just said home. AI systems make decisions just as racist and prejudicial as the humans whose decisions they were fed, right? And so we've had these conversations on Make Sense about one, stolen data sets and copyright issues. Two, biased data sets. So, for instance, in healthcare, how are we going to train healthcare AI when we already know that women are horribly underrepresented in medical studies? Minorities are uh, horribly represented in medical studies as well. So if we build AI on top of data sets that are already inherently biased, and skewed, then we are just going to perpetuate uh, these decisions kind of at scale, right? These
Absolutely.
biases at scale.
So, yeah.
So, um, we will see. I'm excited for the long form essays that will explore why this happened. I really couldn't follow, there was a Kara Swisher podcast published yesterday that said Sam Altman is at Microsoft. And then there's articles today from 3 hours ago saying Sam Altman's at OpenAI. Just like, which one is true? Can we decide? I'm hoping that what I did learn is that they are going to build the board from 4 to 9. And so I'm hoping that right now only 3 men are appointed. I am hoping that they put back on some women, some diversity, and people that represent, artificial intelligence and ethics. Because without that, I think trust really does become even a bigger issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen. And the board expansion is part of that.
Yep. So we're gonna move on to our third segment, deep dive. In this segment, we'll get into the details about innovation across digital and physical products and systems. For those of you who follow along here and on LinkedIn, I've been offering simple ways to understand how software gets built by comparing it to architecture and construction. So design, user experience, product managers, they're like architects, software developers are like construction workers. But Michelle actually works in construction and on physical products, and I was delighted to see that she was featured on Engineering Management Institute's YouTube about bridging the gap between design and engineering. Michelle, can you offer a simple summary of the points that you made?
The simple summaries around the points that I made about design engineers, so whether it's civil, mechanical, electrical, really before they go sit in an office in a cubicle designing physical systems and facilities, to actually spend time on a construction site interfacing with construction managers, construction engineers, superintendents of whether it's iron workers or concrete, really talking to understand how design in an office, whether it's 2D or 3D, still has issues in the field, what is called constructability. And the reason
Mm-hmm.
I said this is number one, the design engineer learns to ask better questions, right? When it comes to when they're having conversations to resolve issues on a construction site, because they're in the office, they can't, we can send you pictures, and pictures may be worth 1,000 words, but being on that site is worth 1,000,000 because it's very, very different. And even
Mm-hmm.
videos, we use videos. So really understanding how to ask better questions. Next is being able to trust the people on the construction site when you're having those conversations. That design engineer is able to ascertain whether or not the people have the right expertise and experience to provide information and even recommend changes or fixes for the issue around constructability. But more importantly, to
Mm-hmm.
me, by being a design engineer that has spent time on the construction site, you are becoming a better design engineer in that you understand what is truly the needs of the end user, usually the public or employees or whomever, but it's usually humans, as well as the people that are actually physically building that facility or that thing. And so without that, it makes it much more difficult and can be very frustrating because oftentimes they're very siloed. Design engineers are very siloed and they don't like to talk to construction people. But I can name my two favorite engineers to work with. One is Aaron. I won't say his last name.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron's like, Michelle, you're out there. I trust you. And Stephanie's like,
Yeah.
well, what are you seeing? If you think that's what it
Yeah.
is, just mark it up on a drawing and send it back to. I said, well, can I mark it on a drawing, take a picture, and send it to you because I'm out in the field, I'm not in the trailer. And they trusted what myself as a field engineer or construction engineer, project manager, as well as different construction skill workers were saying about, hey, that what you're putting on a drawing doesn't make sense. And so it's really important also to have these conversations. So that's why that was my take on design.
Mm-hmm.
They're spending time on construction sites before they spend the rest of their careers in an office or at home, maybe designing different facilities and structures and infrastructure around the world.
There's a lot of similarities from my world in systems engineering and software development, but I want to ask you, it sounds like what you're saying is that as a designer, design engineer, you're designing plans for you have kind of two end users in a way. You're designing plans for your partners out in the field to implement, and you're designing plans for the ultimate customer to experience.
Exactly.
Either way, knowing enough about your partners, in the tech world, we say, and knowing enough to be dangerous. I mean, it's not just a tech statement, but like, yeah, you know enough to be dangerous with the plumbers and the electricians and all the other people so that you can, extend kind of across the chasm and design for them, right? That's how it
Exactly.
is.
Exactly. It becomes
Cool.
interesting in that too often we don't, especially coming out of undergrad, you don't understand how the work is actually done on a project site. You're taught how to do the calculations, and the constructability of it, of who's actually doing the work, is something you learn in the workplace. And like, I think it
Right.
needs to be, and even though you may do internships and co-ops, they generally aren't long enough for you to really get a full breadth of what's going on. And even just a year in the midst of a project can completely change that. And so even having,
Hmm.
and I think that's part of that, as we talk about skill set, that's part of the skill set we need to change, that goes on when it happens with design engineers. And it doesn't have to be just ones that are just coming out of school. I've met plenty that still need to
Hmm.
spend more time on a construction site to really be able to be more better, improve as a design engineer. Yeah, it looks great on
Yeah.
paper. I look at it all the time. Those lines look nice and straight, and we're going to get them as
Hmm.
straight as possible, but we're having some issues, or we don't have the right equipment, we don't have the right experience, we may have more apprentices than journeymen on the site. And so that skill set of the people we have on the site can also impact what is being designed, right? And so it's a lot of other factors in there, and they don't consider or understand as well.
In my world, when I used to work as a user experience designer, which would be the equivalent of a design engineer, um, my differentiator that when I was applying to jobs and working with people, I was like, I'm not going to design you rainbows and sprinkles, because there's a lot of people in the UX field who come from more of an art and creative background, maybe just psychology, but don't understand object oriented programming logic, don't understand relational database design. They don't understand the effort that goes into the choices they make in their designs. So I will always design something that I know the engineers can build with the time, resources, and skills that we have,
Absolutely.
right? Which is what an engineer does. Engineers solve problems with the time, resources, and skills that they have in front of them. Um, and so what you're saying is that design engineers that have no experience in the field might make something that looks nice but then kind of falls apart when people try to build it. It's the same with user experience and user interface designers who might put together some beautiful designs that we can all ogle over, but they're going to take 4 years to build, not the 6 months that we have.
Absolutely. And even though we have design engineers and architects that go into, let's say, conference centers or different places, and they're like, why is the, or the airport is, why is the women's restroom line always so long? Not understanding women have to always get halfway undressed to go to the bathroom. which means the men's bathroom only needs to be about half the size it is, and give that other side, that other space to more women stalls. But nobody does that, or very few people think about it
Mhm.
in that aspect, in how women have to go to the restroom. And how do you, or in addition to that, if you have children, you're taking two kids in there. One is potty trained, so you got to set them up. The other one is in a diaper or a pull up, so you're having to change them. And so it's twice. And some fathers that do this, they understand, they get it now. Like, these urinals, they're take we need some space,
Yeah.
and they start to get it. But we still aren't seeing a significant change. But shout out to Grace Hopper celebration for taking over the men's restroom at when we have conferences, so that we do not have long lines in the women's restroom at the women's event. I appreciate that.
I love that. Snaps to that. You actually brought me to a part that a game that I was gonna play with you, different than the headlines, which was more like believe it or not, fact or fiction, where I throw over, some unfortunate unintended consequences of not having diversity on your technology and engineering teams. For instance, women are 17% more likely than men to die in a car crash and 73% more likely to be seriously injured because there's just not enough women participating in automobile design and crash testing,
Absolutely.
right? That's fact, right? That is not.
And that's a DEI issue, right? When we look at products and how everything is designed around equity, how do you build equity? And I had this discussion with a group of diversity, equity, inclusion consultants, and we were talking about data, and I went and got, it's a book. I don't have it. I can't think of the name of it right now, but about the inequities in the world just around women. And it's like, well, women usually
Yeah.
select their car based on cup holders. I said, is it really based on cup holders, or how many kids they usually end up, how many sippy cups? And everybody has to have their own bottle of water or whatever. It's not really about the couple, it's about all the people that are going to be traveling with them. Because as a
Yeah.
single woman, I've never cared about a cup holder ever. I just want to
Yeah.
know if they're,
The
I just assume it's in there at
I
this point.
I saw an example of, and I didn't write down the stat, but a male engineer that worked in the automotive industry in 2013 introduced a vacuum inside the car. So it was like a piece that, a vacuum that you could extend out of the kind of dash or from underneath the dash to vacuum the car, and he attributed that to his wife and daughter giving him that idea. So
Yep.
I like this one. I just want to read it more because I want to read this one because I think that you find it interesting. So it took 16 years for medical device manufacturers to bring to market an artificial heart that fits the majority of women. So the first one came in 2004 and it only fit 20% of women. And it wasn't until 2020 that they finally came out with one that worked for women too. Isn't that
Yes,
wild? And
it
heart
is.
disease, heart failure is like the number one reason women die, right?
Well, when we look at the disparities in healthcare, who's studied more often, right? Men are studied more often around health. Who gets the most funding for
Yeah.
those studies? Men. And so by the time a woman studies that are funded around women or people of color, is usually less money, it takes longer, and there's like, oh well, not a lot of them really go through the surgery. By the time we see them, it's too late. Well, maybe because nobody's helping them overall. And they tell her, oh well, you would
Yeah.
have to do this, or there's no implant for that. And so you won't know until you really have a good sample size of people that have to certain access to certain things. But anyway, it's a whole journey, and that they're
Yeah.
all always comparing it, and it's not the same journey for
Yeah.
a white man to a black woman, and you really have to look at all the barriers in order to understand what really needs to be
Yeah.
implemented. So it's a whole other.
And I want to make sure I'll put in the show notes. I did have a conversation about designing product equity with Amelie Lamont back in February or March. So
Okay.
I will link that for our listeners to kind of, if you want to further the conversation and learn more about product equity, we have that conversation earlier this year. I want to pull back to from the diversity and the what lack of diversity means for innovation, and particularly for the female experience in the world, and bring that back to this going out into the field as a design engineer. I have an alert set for any time someone on Reddit uses the phrase lady engineer. And ahead of our conversation today, I went through some of those conversations to see if there was anything interesting. And I found someone talking about the fear of harassment out in the field. So, saying that, I mean, we know that, engineering firms in the office and construction teams out in the field, they're male dominated. But, this young woman was expressed fear of going out into the field because of harassment. Is that something that you have heard of before?
Absolutely. I I'm often in conversations on how to get more women into construction. And I'm actually started working on a blog into last month, early of this month, about the real issue is around women's safety, and physical safety on construction sites. In that, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't provide the safety in the office, why would we trust that you would provide safety for us on a construction site? It is much more dangerous for us there. It is very much a closed loop in that people don't share. And what I mean is there are rules on construction. If somebody's spouse is cheating and they're in the field, they nobody talks about it. Nobody will share, even if the other
Mm-hmm.
spouse works for the company but is in the office. There are certain rules, and there are certain things that just
Mm-hmm.
won't be shared, and there's very little protection. And so when you're asking women like, "Hey, come work for us and work on a construction site," you have to really show and prove to them what your culture is like, especially in the office around women and sexual harassment and physical altercations and things like that, because if you can't show them that, why would they trust their lives, literally their lives, on a construction
Mm-hmm.
site? And so I find that it is very real and it's very important. I found the women that are able to work in construction successfully usually are in a family environment, meaning everybody knows their husband, their brother, their uncle, their father, and they are not going to bother them for the most part because they know they have ties in the industry. On the other spectrum of that, it is there are specific men that refuse to let women be harassed in their presence on their projects. And they take a stance on that and they make it well known. If you don't have those two things, those women are usually on their own and it doesn't always go well. Sometimes they aren't physically harmed, but things may have been done to them or said to them.
Be emotionally, psychologically harm
Exactly.
too.
It is very heightened,
Yeah.
and people always think, you can literally be 4 stories up, there are no stairs, there's the elevator that goes up with 1 or 2 people, and so how do you getting away from your harasser is much more difficult when you're on a can be much more difficult
Mm-hmm.
and has safety implications in the same process. So I absolutely agree with what was posted on a deeper level. Men don't see it like, you should be able to go to the ATM at 2 in the morning and not have fear of being harassed or robbed. People, "Oh, you should not go," but why? But why is that a thing? And that's the same thing. Why should I have fear of working on a construction site as a woman? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cultural things have to change.
It's interesting because a construction site, like take out the DEI, a construction site for any human being is dangerous. You need a hard hat, you need steel-toed shoes, and there's bias in that too, right? There's not a ton of options for women in the clothing that they get to wear, and there's a few like emerging brands trying to make space for construction gear for women, designed for women and women's aesthetics. But one, it's already physically dangerous for women because they don't have necessarily the right gear, right? Then and now you're talking about, well, like now let's add like if it's an unhealthy toxic masculinity type environment and there isn't like a strong ally, then it can be psychologically intimidating to go into those spaces. The one thing that you said that made me like bristle is you're like, the women that fare the best are the ones that like it's their family's company, right? And that, right, you said it's like, oh, it's because their dad and their brother and their uncles or their husbands or whatever are on the site too.
Yeah.
And it made me bristle because, you're committed to, diversity in engineering and I'd love to see more like women in engineering as well. But the fact is that most women that study engineering go because they had a brother or a dad in engineering. And so how do we like get more women in? It made me bristle that like, oh, like the women that can feel safe are the ones that have brothers and dads that are engineers. And it's like, well, what about the women that we want to take a huge leap and be in this field, right?
And I'd
Um,
say there are a lot of
it
programs that close that gap, and because the women need to see other women in the field, and that's really for a lot of women of color. They aren't looking for a man. A man may not be it, but seeing another woman doing the work, or a woman in college that's studying, then for the woman in college, somebody that's actually in the workplace, and a woman in the workplace in 0 to 5 years seeing somebody that's 10 years ahead of them. And so it's usually them seeing somebody that looks like them that they can relate to, that really gives them the hope and really drives them forward in it. So we are seeing a lot of that. And social media on the plus side has given the opportunity to do that. Even you naming yourself Lady Engineer. And so if you do a book, maybe you use AI to create a Lady Engineer book for girls. You tell your story about how you followed your dad around to be the civil engineer. And he was like, no, you wear a dress. I'm like, no, dad, I wear jumpsuits and we're going out to survey the neighbor because I want to put in a volleyball court or whatever. And that's your story. And it really draws to girls. You have a story to tell. You're the lady engineer. And I'm love seeing social media do that. And I've seen so many women start creating, whether it was online. The sister scientist is a chemical engineer that graduated from Stanford, who now is a co-founder of a natural hair or black hair product company. But that was her online name, and she still calls Sister Scientist. And then other women creating books just for kids of color to see themselves doing different things in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. So the lady engineer has a
Yeah.
kids book coming out, I hear.
Thank you.
Already have the name.
I mean, I have a lot of things. I have a lot of things coming out that I'm working on. So I do definitely want to be doing more storytelling and content creation. And it was an idea of mine earlier this year that I would love to start using my video distribution, my podcast as a platform for a lot of these younger 20 somethings. I see them. I see you all on Instagram, like sporting your hard hats, showing what it can be like for women out in the field, having fun. Also showing that you can be, feminine and have a personality and be an engineer, that these things can coexist in the same person. So yeah, we got to a point I didn't know we were gonna make, but like, yes. Power.
Yes.
But yeah, my dad never let me cross a bridge without explaining to me how that bridge was designed and built. So
As my family says, you're weird, Aunt Shell, my niece and nephew. And I go, thank you. And they look at me like, I do not want to be like everybody else. I prefer to be like
yeah.
you. And they're starting to get that, like they don't want to be. And I would say, as far as diversifying and seeing more women come into the space, the opportunity is really big. We have a shortage of civil engineers. It's just showing them what does that look like. And civil more maybe getting more over on the design side and the construction side. A lot of women that come through civil, they end up in like water or they go more in sustainability, environmental. We still need you in the design. Come over here. Come,
Yeah.
because a lot of things are left out when it comes to women's and our needs and just other people. I think women also design more inclusively when it comes to infrastructure.
I would agree with you too. We have the ability to look at things like from many different angles, the empathy and the compassion, and also understanding, um, what it's like. Either as a minority or a woman, and I do want to be careful to say, like, the woman of color experience different than white women experience, but at all of it, we do experience the world that is not designed for us, right? In some ways. And so being able to look at all of those angles, um, it does allow us to design for more people, I
Yeah.
think. One thing I wanted to make a point of that I wasn't sure we were going to get to is you had a great LinkedIn post just about what white women can do to make more space for women of color. And the point was actually something that I think all women need in the workforce, right? Which is to be kind of like to understand that there is room for more than one of us at any given table, right? And to lift each other up and complement each other rather than to compete with each other. Because if we compete as if there's only one seat at the table, it becomes very, very toxic when the reality is that we can make space for everyone.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us a little more about that conversation? And maybe if I missed a point, I would love to hear it.
So I I think you get the gist. And the reason why I talk about white women from other Black, Indigenous, other people of color is a lot of white women assume that all women's struggles are the same, and they aren't. And on the intersectional lens, it's very
Yeah.
different. And so, what the reason why I point out white women from other women is white women will think they're partnering with other women of color, but they have them more in a subservient role. Oh, well, help me with this, as opposed to how can I help uplift you? Where are you trying to go? What barriers do you have? Oh, I can help remove these barriers for you because they have additional ones. So the journey is not the same. And so that's why I made that differentiated. I wanted to differentiate that specifically at the same time, what I find is once that is often pointed out, it's like, oh, these white women start to understand what they have done if they're receptive to it and the things they need to change. And so now, like you pointed out, it's not a competition. And I remember talking to um, a huge international STEM organization. I won't say which STEM it is. So I'll just leave. And one of the people around their membership was membership boards. They worked internal to the organization, not like for a chapter, was saying how organically their board was diversified. And I asked him to name who was part of the board prior to it being diversified. He named two women. I said those women worked together. I said you just weren't privy to the conversations and the meetings they had. I said I guarantee if you go ask them, they will tell you what the two is a white woman and a black woman, what they did to diversify the board. I say this did not happen organically at a national level for international, at the highest level, not for an international organization that's 100 plus years old with over 100,000 members.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he sat there and he thought, he was like, that's a good point. Because you can't, they weren't even having it at the chapter level. How are you going to have it at the national level? Right?
Yeah.
And I said, go to have a conversation. I guarantee you, these two women partnered together to make this change happen in the organization. And they knew if any men, especially white men, got privy to it, it probably gotten blocked. And so they
They did
worked
it gently, they did it slowly, they were very
intentionally.
cunning, it sounds like.
Exactly.
They, but it sounds like they probably also invited people into it in a way that like wasn't challenging, right? So sometimes I could imagine if the two women were like, we're going to diversify the board and like put, their stick down and demand that that's going to happen. That's when, maybe the white men would be like, no, this is like reactive to it. But when the two white women are like, hey, like, I think we should, start putting more diverse candidates up front and then like let everyone participate in the selection, right? You kind of make it makes it appear organic, right?
Exactly. It does.
Yeah.
That's why I said when white women and black women or other women of color come together and it's not a competition, they're truly driving change. They are very much very, very powerful in making that happen because the white woman can usually navigate in spaces and get the ears that the black woman or other women of color can't get, and the women of color are very savvy and very strategic in how they utilize resources, right? Like if we could have $250,000 and we all have 2,500, what can we get done and where can we pull
Mhm.
in other free labor from? And so it's really interesting to see that pair work together to make changes in organizations. So I challenge you, if you think something happened organically in an organization, it didn't. It was some women it was some women behind it, working diligently.
Covert ops.
Exactly, but they knew that's what had to happen in order for it to work. So we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see what else happens in the next few
But
years.
Well, for those of you listening audio only, my grin could not be any wider. Michele, you just really brought it home for us on what partnership, what listening, collaborating, communicating, and diversity of thought and people and viewpoints can really do for innovation in both physical and digital spaces. So I think you made it make sense at the end. So thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tavis, and guest, Michele Heyward. We hope you enjoyed our take on the process of innovation in both physical and digital kind of engineering spaces. Michele has a diversity recruitment and retention guide that we will link in the show notes. So definitely check that out. Michele, where can people find you online?
So you can go to PositiveHire, HIRE.co, so PositiveHire.co. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm the most active on social media. Just let me know where you heard this podcast from, because that way I can go back and tell Lindsay, girl, guess what?
Yes.
Got a new connection from your podcast. So I really we both appreciate it
Hire.
either way.
Yeah. Awesome. So, final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each of these Make Sense episode hits. On YouTube, hit that subscribe for next week's episode, and for audio only, follow wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Michele, for joining me.